here for book 5. I don't know how many of you have read it, but it spans your life, or Carlo's life, between ages sort of 19 and early 30s. It starts off in a writing academy. You're a student. Can I say you?
Yeah, it is me.
Okay. You're a student. In the course of the book, there's a lot of drinking, getting too drunk, falling in love, marriage, the end. I won't give anything away. Bad behavior of various sorts, and ambition. And I kind of feel like this book, more than the others, is about your literary ambition and the literary ambition of a young man. And I guess I want to start with 2 questions. The first is, how do you regard that ambition from the perspective of today?
Yeah.
And then also, how has your ambition changed? Because in the book, it's this desperation to get published.
Yeah.
And obviously now you're at a completely different point in your life. What are you ambitious for now? What does it feel like? It's so different from the ambition of a 19-year-old who's never been published, so.
Yeah. I think when I first wanted to be a writer, that was because I was, a reader. I read so much, and it was kind of a natural thing to me to wanting to be a writer. But then, when I was in my 17, 18, there was a lot of, it was like I had this. I wanted, to be free. I had this, romantic dream about the bohemian life and all that kind of things. And the most important thing, I think, was that I wanted to be seen. And there was a lot of those ambitions that's not so, that doesn't feel good even to talk about, but that you have, it's kind of packed into one ambition. It's many, many, many things, and it's not only good things. And I had that when I was 19. I remember that very clearly. And the one thing I wanted was to get a novel published. That was what I was trying to do. And it seemed like it was completely impossible. It seems like it was completely out of reach. And that book is about that feeling, you want something desperately, and you have to realize, no, it's the lie of my life. I'm not that kind of person, I can't really write a novel. And then I did, when I was 29, and my first book came out, and it was a minor success in Norway, and I achieved everything I ever wanted. And then I realized, no, this is not it. It's the writing that's the thing. But then I couldn't write, because then I had all this, tension, all these people, expecting things from me, which I tried to please somehow. So it took me, after the first book, it took me 7 years before my next book came out. So newspapers started, they write things like, where are they now? They called me, or if they had an article about writer's block, they called me, what is it like to have a writer's block, So that was very good for me, because then I kind of get rid of all these things, and I realized the good stuff is to write. I mean, that's the essence of this. And this book is, about the movement to that place.
Yeah. And obviously with the My Struggle books, your success has been exponential compared to what happened to you at 29, I assume.
Yeah, but it still somehow prepared me for it.
It
because
did.
Now I know, how to. I don't know how to deal with it in all aspects, but I know that it's the right thing that's important,
Yeah. So you haven't been sort of put off your path by all this in any way?
Somehow, of course, I have, because it's very overwhelming. But then I have been writing constantly in this attention thing. And the thing about My Struggle for me was that it was liberating, because I just said, okay, I just write. I don't care about anything, the style. It doesn't have to look good or anything. And I have kept that during my writing. So I just write. And I've published like 5 books since My Struggle was published.
5 books?
Yeah.
And are they similar in the sense, how do those 5 books, obviously you can't talk generally about 5, but how do they relate to My Struggle? You said there's something similar in the sense that you're not concerned about style and you just write, but is there are they autobiographical or quite different from that?
I wanted to, have this idea of writing something truthful, or something honest, or something real. I think real is the thing. And when you have been writing something like I have, if you repeat it, when you do it the first time, it is real, that's how it is. But if you repeat it, and if you kind of try to reconstruct it and make it, then it's not real anymore. So I try to get away from what I did then.
Yeah.
And I think probably it's not as good. I think it's really isn't any good, but it still is. I'm just moving, and I think like writing as a movement. So a novel, that's a movement. And there is also movements in between novels,
Yeah.
And this, my struggle book is, it's like going up and down and here and there, and that's kind of a way I'm visualizing what it is to write.
Well, wait, when you said it's not as good, do you mean that you don't, I just don't want to misunderstand. Were you saying that the 5 books since you don't think are as good? Or like what's that not as good? I don't.
It's quality, that's that's very hard to pin down, I think. So, okay, let's say that when I studied and I was meeting literature for the first time, that was in the period, I'm describing that in book 5. Yeah. It's like I'm just been reading a lot of stuff like I'm eating or drinking or whatever, and I never reflected upon it, I was kind of kid who came home with 2 bags of books and just read everything. Yeah. And I was writing that way too when I was 19. And then I was starting at a writing academy, and I realized, and I was presented with the best literature, real literature, and I realized this is, way beyond me. And it was like I was running into a wall because I realized, I can't do that. But still, those books, it's kind of a hardcore, classic, modernist writing, is still what I consider the best. The best page I've read in a book is The Death of Virgil, Herman Broch, which is really, but I think that's the best. And I tried to write like that for many, many years, and my struggle is the opposite of that. It's just, say goodbye to that, I'll just pour everything out. And when I was doing that, it felt like I was, way above my standard. It felt like this isn't quality, this isn't good, this isn't real literature, Yeah. And it isn't, but it has something else. It has some kind of an energy and a directness, which is good. But still, I never felt like this is really good literature, Yeah. And that was what I've been doing. And that was maybe the hardest part of writing them, not thinking this is, Right. Yeah. And then I've done that, and I've been praised for that. And then I was starting something else. I thought I can't think about quality. That's impossible, because if I do, I'm stuck in something. So I just try to write. And those books, my struggle is written, with my heart. And the next books, they are not. I haven't invested, my heart and my soul in them. So that's why I think they maybe not be, they're not burning like these books are.
And do you know why your heart and soul haven't been in the books since? Is it because you gave so much?
It's like this. It's like I don't want to write about myself. I don't want to write about, my own psychology. I don't want to go inwards. I want to go outwards. Yeah. I'm not going very far outwards. I go like 2 meters. And I'm writing about objects, things, yeah. In my surroundings. So it's short text. It's one text, one object. Like I could write a text about vomit, and I try to explain what it is and how it looks. And then I could write about love, or a glass of water, or a tree, or whatever, Right. And it is kind of self-biographical too, because it's directed to my then unborn daughter. It's like it's a letter to her, and it's like, this is the world. We are these people, and you're coming to us. Like,
it's good you explained vomit to her.
Yeah.
Very important to understand that. I was here last night at the museum. I don't know if anyone saw this conversation between James Benning, who's a, experimental filmmaker, and Rachel Kushner, the novelist. Oh. And I don't think they meant this to happen, but half of the conversation, the first half an hour, was taken up by this question of what is research? Because he wanted to say that, for instance, if you go volunteer at a hospital, then then you write about it, then that's research. And she wanted to say, no, that's life. There's no research, there's just life, and you write from your life. And to her, there was something exploitative about talking about the things you do in the world as research. And I wonder if you have, what that word means to you, research, if that comes into your process with any of your books, or which side you fall on, if either.
Yeah, in my struggle, there's no such thing as research, because they're completely based upon memory. And I thought when I started, it should only be what's in my head. You know, that's the real. That's you know, my starting point. And even though I wrote something, for instance, and I showed it to my brother, and he said, "No, it didn't happen that way," and I can prove it. You know, I kept it in my way in the book.
Yeah.
So. So there's no research. But then in book 6, which will come out next year or something here, I wrote a longer kind of essay biographic thing about Adolf Hitler. But it's not like research, it was like obsession. You know, I was just reading about him and about the era and about Nazism and about Germany and Vienna and all kind of stuff, and reading, writing, you know. But I guess that's kind of research. But it didn't felt like that. You know, I was just obsessed by it.
Yeah, you weren't like going to it so you could write about it. You were going to it because you wanted to go to it.
Yes, and I'm looking for something. You know, I don't know what that is. So,
Yeah.
so for me, also writing is a way of reading. You know, when I read a book, it's I am completely blank when I shut it down. I don't know what I've been reading, and I don't reflect upon it. But if I start to write about it, then something will come out. You know, then I will. There's a lot of stuff that I have gathered when I read something, but it's in the writing that it comes out.
Yeah. Are you? I just noticed reading all these books that there's like this notable absence of therapy, Freud, psychoanalysis, which is kind of interesting because you're writing about yourself, and that's such a. I mean, so many people who write about themselves kind of go into that sort of language. Is it a cultural thing, or is it that you don't have an interest in that mode, or you know,
about
of thinking about yourself? Yeah, there's no therapeutic type language at all in it, which in a lot of American autobiographical fiction there is. Like that I comes in quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's purely cultural. I think.
Yeah.
I've said, you know, my wife once suggested that we should go with pair therapy.
Yeah.
You know, but I said, and this sounds kind of brutal, but I'd rather shoot myself in the head than go in therapy. And I think you are embraced a place where you're supposed to take care of things yourself. You know.
What is? Oh, your marriage is the place where you're supposed.
No. You know, life. You're supposed to take care of things yourself.
Right.
And so you don't go to the doctor if you are, you know, if you're dying, you do it, but not before that. And that's a cultural thing.
Yeah, that's a cultural thing. But
Yeah.
you have socialized. I mean, I'm Canadian. We have socialized medicine. Your country does too. I feel like everyone I know in Canada like goes to the doctor almost like going to McDonald's. I mean, you just go because it's free, and you have your toe hurts, you go. Like, but no, not in Norway or Sweden. You wait till you're.
Yes,
at
least, you know, where I come from, it's like that. But it's, my mother, she's a psychiatric nurse, is that yeah, and she's I was raised also by, you know, talking in that kind of language about myself and about herself and about her friends, and very analytic way, you know.
Yeah.
And so I'm used to that. I mean, I'm used to think in those terms about myself and other people, but not there isn't a specific language for it. And the thing I know is that it doesn't really help to name things. It doesn't really help to understand what's wrong with you. I mean, I'm writing 3,500 pages about myself, trying to not investigate myself. I don't know, I still feel bad when I wake up every morning.
That's reassuring. Yeah. had a question that I forgot. Oh, yeah. So especially reading this book, I had this feeling like you felt like you were the only deceitful person in your realm. There's a way in which you look at other people and you take them at face value. You don't ever think you're being manipulated. You don't ever think that somebody's two-faced. There's infidelity in the book, but you never suspect anybody else of infidelity. No. And I thought that's very interesting. And I wonder if that's like, is that how you consciously feel, like that other people are all honest as opposed to everyone's as dishonest as you? As your character? I mean, the character is quite dishonest in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
I
know exactly what you mean. And I think I've never got that question, and nobody has mentioned it. But I think that's that's an important thing in these books, and it is because it's in my life. Because I am. It's true what you're saying. There is a certain innocence to that, and a certain lack of imagination, and there is a sort of lack of cynicism,
Yeah.
I have a friend, he's frequently in the book, he's called Gay, and he's a cynic, and he kind of trains me up in looking at people and suspecting people,
Right.
There is a motive behind this, haven't you thought of that,
Yeah.
But I still can't get it. When I meet someone, I'm kind of only seeing the face, as you're saying, and I think they are,
being honest with you.
Yeah, and nice and good people, no matter what, really. And that's a good thing, but it's also a cruel thing because you are. There's a certain level of inauthenticity that I have when I do that, because it's not really true. But it's like that. So in that aspect, I'm like a child.
Yeah. You call that calls to mind. I'll try to get the exact quote. You call the desire for fame the desire of a child.
Yeah.
I like that. The piece you wrote in the New York Times, not the one where you travel across America, but before that you wrote a piece called I Am Someone, Look at Me.
Yeah.
And it's about how in Scandinavian culture you're not to think you're better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's the culture you grew up in. And of course it's changing now, but it's very shameful to
It's not only shameful, it was impossible, Yeah, it really was. When I'm thinking about myself being like 12, 13, 14, and what all my friends were doing, it was impossible to be very different.
Yeah.
It was, and the interesting thing is that, there is this writer, he's Danish, but he wrote in Norwegian, Aksel Sandemose. He wrote a law of small Scandinavian society, which is saying that you're not supposed to think, you are not worth anything, you are not special, you are only one of us,
Yeah.
And that is one aspect of it is very cruel, because that leads to bullying and to, people take the group is the most important thing.
Uh-huh.
But you can also, twist it a little bit and think this is a good thing, this is solidarity, this is not thinking about yourself, it's thinking about us, So it has both sides. But in a small community, it's only repression, it's only,
Yeah.
And then we saw this must have been late 70s, early 80s. We saw these American films, we saw Fame, the TV series coming, and it was, how can you relate to that? The whole point of that film is to express yourself. Look at me, I can do this, and everybody else is applauding. Yes, you're good and you're great, and it was, wow, what is this? It's completely other way of looking at it.
Yeah.
That was why kind of music is so important in that book, because music it's outside of this world, and it's on a stage, and it's like you're supposed to do something original or be special, and you are allowed to wear a red hat if you want to, because you're in a band, and that's But I think it's interesting because it is both, repressive but also a good thing. And I guess it comes from a kind of a rougher society where it was absolutely necessary that everybody was in the same boat, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there's Alice Munro, I'm sure you all know the Nobel Prize-winning author, and she's Canadian, and I think it's her first book was called Who Do You Think You Are?
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. How come that book that article had a double byline? It's by yourself and Ingvild Berkey. How is it that you wrote that piece with?
No, she's translated it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was written together. Have you written anything with somebody else?
Have I? I wrote a film manuscript with one friend once. That's the only thing I have done.
Was it good?
Yeah, it was interesting because I met him when, that's also in the book, I think.
Yeah.
I met him when I was 24 and he was 20. I desperately wanted to be a writer. He desperately wanted to be a writer. And he was 4 years younger than me, like my little brother. And he was rejected like 17 times or something. And he was full of energy, you know. And one day he came over to my place and he said, you know what just happened? My book is going to be published. And I remember I was so jealous. It was like a completely black curtain fell down in me, you know. And I have to pretend I was pleased on his behalf, but I was, and then I, of course, I were pleased too. But I couldn't write, and he was just writing. And he said to me, and he was, I want to write a film. He said, why don't we rent a house, sit there, write this film? And I said, yes, let's do that. And we decided he'll write, and I'll sit behind, and then I'll write, and he sit behind. And he was just writing.
You just sit behind the other person while they were writing?
Yes, we were sitting like us, and the screen is there, and he was just like writing. And then it was my turn, and I was, what shall I write? And he was saying, just write. And I said, yeah, but I can't, just write. And it went on like this for like 2 days, and then I said, okay. And I just started like he was doing, and he said, yeah, what were we scared about? It's just to write. So it was to lever the level of shame. He was very important just in that lesson, you know. It wasn't a great movie and it wasn't never made, but it was like the process was great.
Yeah.
It was a liberating thing.
Yeah, I mean, it connects to what you were saying about just writing those books. And
yeah.
Did you do a lot of editing after all those pages came out? Did you do line edits? Did you sculpt or shape or?
The first book is there's a kind of a proper normal editing. I sat down with my editor, and we moved that to there and cut out pieces and made it into a proper book. But on the second book, he said to me that there's no need to do that. We don't have to do this. Project is based upon something else, so we just leave it there.
Yeah.
And the same is with all the books. There's no editing in the books.
And you didn't edit them before you gave them to your editor? You just
No,
gave
it's
them
like
as...
they are written. With the exception of the last book, because and I think still that my publishing house, fooled me somehow, because it was so long, and they said we have to take out 150 pages. And I said, why? And I said, yes, it is a practical thing. We can only, publish like 1,120 pages. They said. And
I
said, yes, okay. So we did that. We took out maybe 150 pages. So it is 1,120 pages now. But now I realize, no, of course it could have been longer. It's just a way of persuading me into that.
Why do you think they made you take 150 pages out of a 3,600 page? It seems so...
Yes, very, very strange.
Yeah.
They had their reasons, I guess.
What did you say?
They did have their reasons.
I mean,
it is almost impossible to read a book when it's kind of 1,400 pages.
I guess so. Can I talk to you about... would you want to read that page that we talked about, actually? Because I think it's nice just to get you read so well.
So it's that part?
Yeah.
Down there?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Was art only an inner phenomenon? Something that moved within us and between us? All that which we couldn't see, but marked us indeed? Which was art, was us? Was this the function of landscape painting, portraits, sculptures, to draw this external world, so essentially alien to us, into our inner world? When Mom went home, I accompanied her to Keflavik Airport. I said my goodbyes there. On the way back, I read Stephen Hero by James Joyce. first book I had bought by him, and quite evidently his weakest. It was also unfinished and not meant for publication, but there was something to learn from it, too. How he slowly transformed the autobiographical element, which was obvious here, into something else in Ulysses. Stephen Dedalus was a strong young character, summoned home to Dublin by his father's telegram. Mother dying, come home. But in the novel, Ulysses that is, this arrogant, brilliant young man was perhaps first and foremost a place where things happened. In Stephen Hero, he was a person, distinct from the world around him. In Ulysses, the world flowed through him and the story. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Dante, Shakespeare, everything moved through him, and the same was true of Bloom, except that in him it wasn't the higher and the best that was in motion, that flowed, but rather the tone with its people and phenomena, advertising slogans and newspapers articles. He thought about what everyone else thought about. He was every man. There was, however, another level above them, namely the place from where they were observed, which was the language and all the insights and prejudices the various forms of language embraced, almost in secret. But in Stephen Hero, there was none of this. There was just a character, Stephen, in other words, Joyce, set apart from the world, which was described but never integrated. This development culminated from what I could infer in his final book, Finnegan's Wake, which I had bought but hadn't read, where the characters had disappeared into the language, which lived its own everyman life.
I love that passage, those specific lines where you say that the character was a place where things happened, and the world flowed through him. And that, to me, is such an apt description also of the My Struggle books. Do you think that was you had that model in your mind in some sense, or was that something when you read those books that...
I think I read Ulysses when I was like in my early 20s, and I didn't get much of it. But because it's a difficult book, but also because it's in English and I was, Norwegian and so on. But I kept thinking about that book and I reread it, and somehow, even though I didn't understand it, I understood that, because that's the essence of that book. And it was so important for me, that thought. And also that it takes place in a day, and it's like all of the history and all of, art and everything is kind of shattered into that day. So it doesn't exist as an arc above. It's like it is in bits and pieces. And that book is so, extremely well crafted in that manner. So it has been a kind of a thing I've been thinking about. And I think that's the way, plagiarism, that's one way of doing it. And the other one is like you just like something and you read it and it goes into you and your way of thinking, and then there is a novel that is basically very much influenced by not a book maybe, but an experience of reading a book, and it's hidden because nobody can see there's any direct connections, but it still is there, there is
Do you I wonder, because I feel the same way, that the books I read in my teens and early 20s, they'll never leave me as influences in some sense. And they're such stronger influences than anything I've read in the last 5 years. And I want to ask you if there's anything you've read recently in the last 5 years or so that's had an impact on you, as in terms of maybe this is a different way of writing, or if anything's gotten into your soul in the same way as those books in your early life.
Not as strong as in my early life, but there are several books that have made a huge impression on me lately. And the first was an old book by Turgenev. It's called in English, I think, a sportsman's sketchbook or something, or a hunter's diary. And it's basically written by a man, it's Turgenev, and he's walking around or riding around an area hunting, and he's describing people he meets, describing what he sees, nature and so on. It's very, very, very simple, but it is, it is so good that you feel like you leave it full of hope, and it's impossible to explain why. I think it's the feeling of getting so close to him and his environment, Russia, 1840, because there's no purpose in it. There's nothing he's making this into something to show us something.
Right.
And without that, it's like you are there, And then I just, on this tour, was reading Maggie Nelson, The Argonauts, which I loved, but it's also in a very troubled and problematic way, because it's so hugely different from me. It's like it starts here and then it, keep going in that direction, and I'm kind of running after it to see what that is. And that's also one of the great things with literature, is that you can go in there and have all these strange things that you never have thought of inside of you,
Yeah.
And then there is another American novel that was very important for me. It was Ben Marcus, The Flame Alphabet, which is also, that book I really can't explain why it's so hypnotic and why it's so good. I have no language for it, but it is really, 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 really good.
Do you know the right? And you're publishing that one in
that
press.
one I'm publishing. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the writer Kenneth Goldsmith? Kenny Goldsmith?
No, I don't.
He's very interesting. He appropriates a lot of texts, and anyways, he was very controversial because of a performance that he did recently. But he has this lecture about, I can't remember, it's smart stupid or stupid smart, and he sort of says the artist is not just smart, they're dumb. Like there's like this balance between stupidity and intelligence.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you think about that, about the role of like stupidity and dumbness in making something. Because I kind of feel like, there's that's as much active as intelligence or wisdom or knowing.
Yeah, I think I can completely identify with that notion. Because I think when I, couldn't write, we're not talking about quality here, but when I couldn't write, it was, the problem was that I wanted to be too clever, it was too cerebral in a way.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make it and to construct it, and then you're all only using your mental ability, and now I completely trust, my intuition, my instincts, whatever. And I think, why do we stay away from the stupid? Because that's such an important part of our lives, at least it is in mine. But I think there is it's like, we're afraid of being laughed at, and that's so strong. That fear could keep you to be very intellectual, very hardcore intellectual, just that nobody should think you are stupid, or laugh at you.
Yeah.
And then it's, in my own writing, I think my experience is that thinking is kind of, overrated. It is, it's so many other things. And you perceive the world through emotions, But if you read an academic text about something, there's no emotion there. It's like it's taken away.
Yeah.
And emotions, what's that? Emotions are somehow blind. I mean, you fall blindly in love. And that's because you don't, analyze it. You don't think, this isn't maybe smart for me to know her. Because that's a cynic way of dealing with the world. You just fall stupidly in love. And hatred, that's blind too, Yeah. But the only thing thinking is good of is kind of to uncover yourself, to find out why, you have all these feelings, but you're hiding things for yourself, and it's transformed into those kind of feelings, so that you don't have to say to yourself certain things, And in writing, at least, there's a completely balance. But I think in painting or in that kind of art, it's much more. There's almost no thinking at all.
Yeah, so much more animal and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, thinking keeps a distance to the situation. Feelings, makes you present in the situation. And children, you wouldn't say children are stupid, Some children are, of course, but that's not the thing with them. But they are just in a different mode. They experience this thing differently. They don't understand so much, but they do feel a lot,
Yeah. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about money, because there's no real discussion about money in any of the books, which is so interesting. And I don't know if that's coming from a sort of middle class background where, if I'm assuming you come from a middle class background where people who think about money tend to be the very rich or the very poor. But if you come from a middle class background, it's not as pressing of a question, and you're ambitious for so much in these books, but you're never ambitious for money. And I've talked to you a little bit about this before. You say, like, you said to me, when you get it, you just throw it away. You're not a...
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how your relationship to
to
money?
Yeah, it is in fact described in that book when I was a student. It's true, I don't care about money. I really don't. I mean, but it's very good to have money, you know. But it is, in that book, I'm borrowing money from all the people I know all the time. I don't have money myself, you know, so I just borrow and borrow. And I thought, you know, that's okay, and that's my way of life, and so on. And then I was married, and the first thing my wife said to me was, you must stop borrowing money. You can't borrow money. You can't really do it. It's so humiliating for you, you know, you have to stop. And I was made aware, okay, I can't do that, okay. So then I stopped borrowing money. I never do that anymore, you know. And in the book also, I started work in a hospital just to get money. And then there is another aspect of this, which is Scandinavian society, where university is free, schools are free, hospitals are free. So if you want to survive, you don't read that much when you're young, you know.
Yeah.
And then if you are a writer, you won't believe this, but you know, I've got grants every year since my first book came out, you know,
right.
like a pay, you know, for a job. I've stopped now after my struggle become a success, but if you're a young writer, you can get that.
Yeah.
And the government buys 1,000 copies of each book published in Norway
Wow.
to get to the libraries, you know.
Wow.
And why do they do that? Because Norway is such a small language. It's only 5 million, so we have to protect the language.
Yeah.
It's a very cheap way of doing that. So all libraries have all Norwegian books, and you can go there and borrow them for free. The writers get paid, publishing house gets paid. It's kind of a... But then there are people who is in opposition to this, meaning that, yeah, you remove the hunger, you remove the initiative, you remove everything. And yeah, maybe you do that, but I think it's it's so insecure to write. It's such an insecure position. So the more security you can have around you, the better, the more risks you can take. It feels like that, at least. Yeah. I don't know.
I have this fruit fly around my face.
Yes.
It's like, oh no, what's going on? Is that part of the reason you were just talking about the insecurity of writing and how insecure it is, and you have this conversation with Tor in the book about him moving from Bergen, is that how you pronounce it, Bergen?
Yeah.
To Oslo?
Yeah.
And he says that you say you won't do it, you don't want to be in the center.
Yeah.
Is that related to this, like that there's so much insecurity already in writing that to compound that with being in a center would be to emphasize that insecurity, or is there some other reason?
I think more that the center is difficult because it could take you over, you know. If you live in the province, if you live outside of the center, there's not so much ambition, and you're freer in a way. But it feels like in center, in capitals, it's like everything are, you know, circling around ambitions and stuff like that. And in Norway, which is a small country, that's Oslo, when you have ambition or you want to do a career, you go there. And I never wanted to do a career, you know. So that's why I have been outside. I mean, for you, Norway is outside in general. Oslo is really outside. But when you're there, Oslo is, you know,
sure.
a major city. And I lived in Stockholm for a while, and I felt that, and I moved away from Stockholm. You
felt this, like, ambition around you, and it was distracting?
And not only ambition, but also there's a conversation about something, and it tends to be equal. You're okay, now we're interested in this, now we're interested in that, right. And it kind of is moving. But if you are living outside of that, it's like you are not attached to that conversation, which is good.
Yeah.
It is kind of a freedom thing to live a little bit on the outside, I think. It's a good thing. Yeah. For me, at least, it is.
Yeah, I think so. I think so, too. You can be more in your head and just in relation to the books that you're reading. Than whatever's most current.
I wrote a piece about center just recently because I wrote a foreword to Penguin edition of not Dubliners, but his the portrait of the artist of the young man, the Joyce book. And when I read that, I had this impression of, Joyce is the center,
Yeah.
And there is a center in literature, that's Ulysses, that's Marcel Proust, that's all the great book, and they're kind of, and in some way it is a center, but if you read that book, you realize, no, he's completely outside of everything, and that's what the book is about, to get to know the center, and to reflect upon it, and then move away and write about, because the center of the book is where you are, you are the center when you're reading the book, no matter where you are. So it's, I think that's, literature is essentially, spread out. There's no center in literature, it is where you are, and that's, I think that's even an insight.
Yeah, I think it is an insight. I've just gotten the signal that we can go to the questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Is that good for you?
Yeah, I have to watch them though.
So my question is, having read your first book, actually I've read all of your books, what did your family think about these books that you've written? Because they're very personal, especially the first one, extremely personal. What did your family and your, and your wife, etc., how did they react?
Yeah, that's a very essential question. But there have been a reaction in absolutely all kind of ways, So if I start with the hardest, that was my father's family. They completely wanted to stop the book, and I haven't spoken with them afterwards. They don't want to speak with me. And it's not because I wrote about them, but it's because the way I described my father and her mother, which I completely understand, and that's a moral dilemma I had. And I sent them the book before it was published, and they have this reaction. And I could have said, okay, I won't publish the book, that's a possibility. And I was in this huge conflict with myself. But then I thought, and that kind of liberated me in this aspect, was that, they are saying you can't write about my father because he's also my brother and so on. But I kind of changed the question to be, who can stop me? Who can say you can't write about your father? Who can say that, to a son? That's you can't really say that. And then I decided to publish it. And then my wife, she knew that I was writing about us. And she said, and I can quote her because I remember it so good, because she said, okay, you can write about me, just don't make me a bore, she said. And that's and then I gave the manuscript to her, and she was on a train, and she called me back, and I think she said, I don't like it, but I can live with it. And then she called me the second time, and she said, goodbye, romance. And then she called me the third time, and then she was just crying. It was absolutely terrible. But when she came home, she said, "Yeah, you could publish the book, but we have to talk." It was really about what I reveal about our relationship that was important, not what's in the book. So there is and then my ex-wife, she made a radio program about being a character, and she interviewed people, and it was like, it's been all kind of stuff going on. And I feel bad about something of it, but I think, and it's so hard when it became such a huge success, it's like, that's much harder to take in a way, yeah.
Do you think that there's anything particularly lost in the English translations of your texts?
I haven't read, the English translation. I only read when I do like this, read pieces, bits and pieces. And that's a policy I had in the beginning when Don Bartlett, the translator, asked me, how do you want this? Do you want to be a part of the process or whatever? And I said, no. Absolutely not, because what's important in a translation to me is, it is the flow, the tone, the voice, the movements, the big things, and either you have that or you haven't, So if there is, small mistakes or something, that doesn't really matter. And then I got book 5 in the mail just recently from England, and I just started to read To See, and I was kind of hooked. I read 50 pages because I recognize everything, and this is, what I've been written, but it still is differently. It's like it's written by an English writer, which isn't me, so then I could read it. I was kind of protected by it. But it is truly a great translation. And the thing is, and I don't want to go there, but it could be that the English translation is better than the Norwegian, You can't know.
You've cited Ulysses, Joyce, and Proust, and those are, the great, great modernists who really transformed specifically their own lives. And so I can see the model there for my struggle. But you've also written, of course, what I would call more fabulist fiction, like A Time for Everything, for example. Yeah. And I just wonder if you could say a little more about, that impulse. Is that fabulist or kind of making things up a very different part of writing for you?
Yeah, I can. That's a good question. Thank you. Because my first novel was, it is not a self-biographical novel, but I use many, many elements from my life. And it's a typical first novel in that aspect. I think very many writers do that. You just discover yourself a little bit and do a little bit more, and then you have a novel. And in the second novel, I had this many, many years struggle of writing. I couldn't write, and I love the fantastic literature. I love Borges, Cortázar, those kind of writers, And I think that's, And I had this poster on the wall when I was writing. It was an angel and a bird, and I've seen that many, many years, and then just started to write about it, about angels, and I kind of entered a fantastic universe. But the thing in the book is, the premise is, why, if the angels are, real physical beings, that all the paintings are observations of them, and whatever happened to them, And I wrote 100 pages, like an essay about this, and then I had a friend, he's a brilliant writer, and he read it, and he said, well, it's good, but you have to tell stories. You have to tell stories. And I started to retell the stories in the Bible, kind of from the angel's perspective, and that's a novel. And I also, when I started doing that, it was in desert. It was, it was like sand everywhere, sandals, tents, camels, and I couldn't make it alive because I've never been in a desert. I've never seen a camel. It was like it was dead. It was like it was in the Bible, and I thought, okay, what if I put everything in the Bible to Norway? Like in 1890, And when I did that, I was completely free. I could invent everything because that was a universe where everything was, possible. And then I smuggled in things from my own life, my own grandparents and so on. But I think, to be real honest, it's much, much, much more difficult to write a novel, which is an invented novel. And to make it good, that's really, really hard. It's very easy just to write about yourself and so on. It is, for me, it is kind of, there is, a good comparison could be Flaubert. He wrote Madame Bovary, which is an invented novel about a woman. And then he wrote a lot of letters, which is from his private life, and he writes very good. It flows over with life and love and obscenities, and it's very much alive. But if you read them, you see Madame Bovary is, above that. It's kind of a crystallization of something. It is much more than life somehow, and the other things is just life. So if I can do it, that's what I want to try to do, And that's why I wrote my struggle, because I couldn't. I wanted, I couldn't, and then I just have to do this, And that's a kind of a constant. Two constant different impulses in literature. And I don't think the one is better or worse than the other, but it's kind of what I personally like,
The book about angels has been translated into English. It's called A Time for Everything, and it's incredible. It's really, really, you should definitely read it. The Bible when I think about the biblical stories like Noah, I think about your book now. So it's just so vivid, the flooding of the earth. It's amazing. But yeah, definitely buy that.
Hi, you described so beautifully, and I wonder if there's a difference in how you look at visual art from how you read literature.
Your visual art is very, instant, and it's very much about you be captured by something, and it's in the moment, and it's you and the painting. The reading is much, slower somehow, but I think the best novels are when you come to those places, where you just disappear for yourself. And I'm writing a lot about that in book 6, about art, what art is, what it is, and what it means. Because if you are filled with feelings for something, it feels important, then you leave, it's over. Why was it important? I mean, you can see a painting from Holland, it's a glass of water on an apple. Or I was in New York in the Mets and saw a Cézanne painting, which I haven't seen before, and that was apples, And it was like I could have looked at that painting for, like an hour. But why? And what's the use of that? Why can I use it? It's like it's a mystery. It's really a mystery. And it's not because he changed our conception of the room, and it has not to do anything with that. I think it's something completely different, which is intriguing. But I think it has to do with, for me, then I'm speaking personally, it has to do with meaningfulness, and a kind of concentration and meditation and all those kind of things. Which you don't think about when you see colors and shapes, but it's there. I don't know. This is one of the most difficult questions I can think of. Is that why art? And it definitely isn't entertaining, but it still is very entertaining. To look at art. So I think, I just. In these books I was talking about in the beginning, the 4 books about objects, I thought I should have some visual paintings there, so I invited 4 different painters to make paintings. So there is kind of equality to the writing and to the painting. So you can look, and it's very, very different paintings from the text, but it still is something is happening in between there. And I love that because the texts are about looking at things, thinking about things, reflecting about things, and then you have something completely different that you actually can look at. And I did it, to save the book, so that at least something good in there, It's like,
Okay, well, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.